President of the United States. Under the Speaker's announcement, policy January 3rd, 2025, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is now recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, and as always, I apologize to the board staff who I will try not to speak like a machine gun. Mr. Speaker, we're going to do basically three things. I'm going to make fun of us. I'm going to actually walk through some debt deficit numbers, interest, those things that are scaring my economists, myself, half to death. And then I'm going to touch on some of the, and it's a technical economics term, the bedwetting in regards to the reconciliation budget and how people are making things up. So let's have at it. Because I sit in an airplane 10 hours a week and I have some weird reading habits, I actually came across a paper written last year, published just recently. It's in Nature Human Behavior. So one of those quirky, those academic. But it actually, what they did is they went back to the late 1800s and they took all of our congressional speeches up till 2022, and they ran a data set on them. They ran AI, and could you believe, Mr. Speaker, can you believe it? They figured out that our congressional speeches have become less and less and less based in facts. I know this is hard for us to believe, but apparently the quality of idiots, people like me getting up in front of these mics and doing presentations and walking through our job has crashed in quality, in facts. Matter of fact, they use the word intuition. I basically say we make public policy now by our feelings. Because God forbid we go to our voters and tell them the truth about the math. So it made me feel better because I have mocked us for years about how much in the way of public policy we now make on feelings, because it's great television. It gets you followers on social media. You get a hit on cable television tonight if you're willing to make crap up, but do it with passion and feelings. But if you actually want to talk about the math of what's going on in this country, turns out it's how we're rewarded now as elected officials. Now, what was interesting is they had the curve actually starting to fall in 1970, and it's just gotten steeper. So part of it, and part of my conclusion is television, then moving to cable news, and then moving to social media. We have crashed the diet of robust facts in our speeches. So now that we're going to make fun of ourselves, let's go on to the next thing. Mr. Speaker, and for anyone that asks, we've been running the current data on how much we're borrowing. What would you guess we borrow per second right now? We're right now, looks like we're burning $72,000 every second. We're borrowing $72,000 every second. My best guess right now is we will borrow 7.37% of the entire economy this year. And try to keep that number in your head, because we're going to come back to that in some charts and explain why that's so devastating. It's like we just don't care about people's retirement, our kids, the next generation, and how the hell they're going to actually cover any of the scale of debt. And then we lie about what drives the debt. And Mr. Speaker, our best guess is we go from that $72,000 a second this year to maybe about $82,000 a second next year. And this is hard for people to want to accept, but it's the math. Over the next 10 years, the baseline borrowing was about $22 trillion. Now we have what we're trying to do in figuring out how to extend the expiring tax provisions. We have the requests from the White House. We have other, disasters, other things we're trying to cover. We're basically right now looking at, and I'm going to show this multiple times, the United States, what it took us from the day we were elected, Mr. Speaker, how much debt? We will double it. We will double 240 years of borrowing in this 10-year period. The majority of that borrowing over the next 10 years is interest and Medicare. But God forbid, we're not allowed to tell people the truth. Most of the debts, deficits, and demographics is the fact we got old. We stopped having children. We have a shortage of young people in the country. And we're terrified to tell our brothers and sisters the truth about the math. So let's have at it. For anyone out there that's paying any attention, and this number actually probably right now is a little bit worse. We now think it's actually about 75% of federal spending is on autopilot. So you become a member of Congress. What you get to vote on, everything is borrowed. When you vote on non-defense discretionary, when you vote on defense, every dime of that's borrowed. And about $400 billion of what is mandatory spending, which means formulaic. You work so many quarters, you get your benefits. You served in the military, you get your benefits. You're part of a certain tribal group, part of our treaty obligation. You have certain things coming to you. But the things we vote on and the things we try to balance the budget over, okay, well, we need more money for defense. We have threats in the world. Okay. You get down to, we're trying to balance the budget on about 13% of our spending because we're terrified to talk about everything else. You can't touch interest. I'm going to show you a slide here in a moment. This one should scare the crap out of people. And I know my language is becoming more and more inflammatory, but I can't seem to break through. This is from something called Moody's Analytics. Okay, it's one of those fancy subscription services. They have a bunch of economists. They collect data. They have us in 9 budget years. 30% of U.S. tax collections go just to interest. So you pay your dollar in taxes, 30 cents of that in 2035 go just for interest. Does that not scare anyone? When the interest growth is bigger than everything we're talking about and trying to say by multiples, we calculate this year, this fiscal year, one we're living in right this second, we can spend $1.1 trillion, $1.2 trillion in just interest. There's a data set that if we do some of the things, if we were to do the Senate's reconciliation budget with almost none of the pay-fors, in 10 years, interest could be a couple $1 trillion a year. The annual deficit will be $3+ trillion a year. We're probably going to be, 2.3 this year. Last year, for every dollar we took in tax collections, take a guess, what did we actually spend? Took $1 in tax collections last year. What did we spend? We spent $1.39. We take in $1, we spent $1.39. This year was supposed to be better. We were only going to spend, I think, $1.36. I mean, it was supposed to get slightly. We have a small problem with some of the GDP growth numbers. Just that adjustment, we may have just lost $200 billion in tax receipts in this fiscal year. Into September, between now and then. It just shows you how fragile we are when small movements of interest, when you have to refinance $9 trillion. Thank you for hanging out with us. Welcome back. But think about this. A single point of interest on U.S. debt, and it takes years for it to roll in because of how much we have to refinance. So We'll take about $9 trillion to market this year and refinance. We'll issue a couple trillion new this year. A single point of interest over 10 years costs you $3 trillion. Why does this not scare the crap? Why do we not have people coming behind these microphones? But we're better off getting behind these microphones and telling passionate stories, anecdotes, those things, because that's what gets us on social media. That's what gets people's dopamine hitting. But at some point, the math is going to win. And when we have the really smart analytic firms coming and saying they're scared about U.S. sovereign debt, you see things happening around the world that make me very nervous. The appetite for going on the long end of the curve. Look, the United States sells very short-term debt, and then we have 2 years and 5 years and 10 years and 20 years and 30s. But we're having real trouble selling the debt on the long end of the curve. And do not pay attention to some of the debt markets over the last month or two. You want to know why? Because we're in extraordinary measures. We're up against the debt ceiling. We're not issuing new debt. We're only issuing refinance. And what comes due within the cap? What happens a couple months from now when we all raise the debt ceiling? And I love the brain trust that goes, don't raise the debt ceiling. Did I just mention last year for every dollar we took in, we spent $1.39? Just tell me what 39% of the federal spending you want us to stop doing. Because when you don't raise the debt ceiling, we got to end all that. So it's more than a third of all of our spending is functionally borrowed. Just tell me, happy to do it, just tell me which third you want us to stop financing. And those are the very people filling up these hallways demanding we give them more money. What happens when we raise that debt ceiling, Mr. Speaker? And we have to come to market, Treasury has to come to market with $600 billion in functionally to catch up, refund all the accounts they've been borrowing from. That's what you do in extraordinary measures. You grab every account, use that cash, now you got to refund it, and you take that much to market. We have one analyst who's saying you will see a pop in U.S. interest rates, maybe on the 10-year hitting 5. Just boom, because suddenly you're grabbing so much of the world's capital to finance what we've been borrowing internally that now we got to pay back. So just be prepared. These aren't surprises. We all know it, but no one reads the damn documents because it's math. And it turns out, telling the truth, remember our story here, that fact-based discussions on this floor no longer get you elected, no longer are listened to, no one cares about, just make things up because feelings is now how we make legislation. And this board is almost a year old, but it was to try to make a point to to our brothers and sisters, particularly on the left, that keep coming to us, just tax rich people more. And you show them, and we're going to show the slide here, but I'm going to probably have to say it 2 or 3 times so it sinks in. We have a report, detailed report, that sort of walks through every tax hike the left has proposed. And look, we're guilty on our side. Every cut we've actually proposed, but you take every tax hike and then you do the economic data on it, and you get about 1.5% of GDP. Okay, our cuts come out to about 1% of GDP. If I can do that math, that's 2.5%. Do you remember in the beginning of this? We're borrowing 7.3. So the next time you get a politician say, well, just raise taxes on rich people, and then you show them that it's a fraction of what we even borrow every single day. Great rhetorical use of language. Horrible math. Completely fraudulent math. Remember, it's demographics, but we're not allowed to tell people that because it means we as a society have to do hard things. So look, I have this chart here, and I was just trying to make a point. How Washington finances 366 days of spending in 2024. The top 20% of earners covered 201 days. The next quartile down, the next 20%, covered 41 days. The middle earners, so the middle 20%, they paid for 17 days of government spending. The bottom 40% pay for 4 days of government spending, and then 103 days we financed by just borrowing it. We have, I think we are now tied for the most progressive income tax system in the industrialized world. When we modernized the tax code in 2017, the United States income tax system actually became more progressive. But yet, how many times have you heard members around say, well, they gave money to the rich? The rich after 2017 were paying more of the federal income taxes. At some point, we're going to have this really uncomfortable discussion. Is it on the tax side or the spending side? Because I've done entire presentations here on the floor where I've shown you, go back the last 65, 75 years. Here's a time of very high marginal tax rates. We take in about mid 17% of the economy in tax collections. Very low marginal tax rates. We take in about mid 17% of federal taxes. It's sort of, you go up, the actual economy slows down, this is what you take in. So the secret is, how do you adopt regulation and modernize it? How do you adopt tax policy that incentivizes productivity? How do you do the whole thing and get them to interact so you maximize economic growth, and that growth becomes your tax collection stability and gets you to the top of the total dollar amounts, but you're probably going to still constantly fall back into that mean of the percentage of the economy. So have a bigger economy. It's not that complicated. But you constantly, so upper income taxpayers overwhelmingly finance the federal government. Okay, I know this isn't good politics. People like me are supposed to say, yeah, the rich need to pay their fair share. Okay, top 25%, excuse me, the top 20% of earners pay 25.2%. The next quartile pays 15.8%. The middle covers 11%. The fourth quartile down, so the next one down, covers 5.5. Bottom 20% of income earners, we send them money. Remember, we have sort of this negative income tax system, earned income tax credit, those things. So if you're in the 20%, the bottom quartile, we send you money. Matter of fact, we have a whole day, I didn't bring the chart, that shows functionally in America, if you're in the bottom half of income earners. Look, post-inflation, your life is miserable because wages haven't gone up as fast as inflation did. But that inflation was substantially created by stupid policies from the previous White House and the Democrats who spent like crazy, and we financed, we dumped that much cash into society, you set off inflation. It's your high school economics class. And here we are a couple years later, and the poor are still poor because we still haven't gotten wages growing faster yet. And what scares the crap out of me is I'm now seeing some data saying we may have a year where inflation could be hovering around 4% by the end of the year. We got to do policies to get those wages growing. But I have a chart that will show you the bottom 50% pay about 4% of the income tax, but the bottom third actually get money. And in some ways, that's just being compassionate. But we have the data from post-2017 when we did tax reform, when we had the miracle of income inequality starting to really shrink. We had 3 years there where the poor were getting dramatically less poor. Why isn't that moral? Why isn't it good regulatory policy, good tax policy maximizes that velocity? So let's really annoy some of our leftist brothers and sisters. This is there's an article on the Manhattan Institute written by, I believe, Jessica Riedel. It's now about a year and a half old. But what they did is they went through basically all the proposals the left has on raising taxes. And step by step, here's the tax raise, here's the economic effects, here's what you actually take in. Remember our rules about size of the economy, 17.1, or mid 17% of the GDP. Individual income tax, investment tax, raising the corporate taxes, raising the state taxes. When you got to the end, you functionally were getting about 1.5% of new tax receipts for the economy. Okay, all right. I look forward to the Democrats, actually proposing this and actually being willing to vote on it, because they throw these things out, they get them scored, they controlled everything here a couple years ago. Do you notice they never did them? But pretending this solves the problem, so you get 1.5%, you will have stagnated the economy. You already hear the discussions of how close are you to stagflation, which is partially driven because of the economics. And remember, at the end of the decade, or with 9 years or so, 23% of the population is 65 and up. We have a demographic issue for productivity. The point of showing this chart is the solutions you will hear if, God forbid, you go on left-wing cable television, sometimes even right-wing. They're mathematical lies. We're borrowing 7.3% of the economy this year. Are we willing to engage in a revolution of using technology, modernization? How many businesses still run themselves as if it's still the 1990s? Government does. I had someone bring me just the other day a piece of healthcare paperwork. I think it might have been from the Indian Health Services. It was 3-part NCR paper for a purchase order for a healthcare procedure that you fill out, and I think you faxed it in. Have we lost our minds yet? You get protesters from the left saying, don't use technology. You've seen the article after article of the 5 major databases the United States have. None of them talk to each other. If you're willing to actually read, you saw the stories of Small Business Administration having, 3,300 people that had taken out loans, except the small problem is all of them were 114 years and up, meaning they were onto their rewards. They weren't with us anymore. Turns out those $300 million in loans, no one had paid a dime back, but Small Business Administration didn't have the ability to bounce off the Social Security mortality or death file. We've designed these walls to functionally, it's as if the fraudsters designed our data systems here in the federal government. Let's go fill out things, let's go get money, let's steal the taxpayers' money, but we're going to make sure that there's no way to check the data that's being filled out because we want to protect the privacy. Some of that's not privacy. You're asking for a government-insured loan over here, and you can't check the death file? What idiots allow this to happen? And yet you get protesters in front of your congressional offices saying, don't let DOGE and those actually make the system work. I'm sorry you're scared of change. Did I mention to you we borrow $72,000 a second? How do you convince our brothers and sisters across the country, we as members of Congress, the administration, the bureaucracy are taking it seriously if you're not even willing to make the data talk to each other? And so back to one of the things that has just annoyed the crap out of me. I used this board a handful of times for some of my left-wing protesters the last couple of weeks. And to the credit, some of them were actually shockingly intellectually honest, saying, oh, that's not part of our talking notes. No one told them the truth. Guys, it's on the internet. Trust me, I'm not that bright. I just looked it up. It's there. You can find it. The baseline of the next 10 years, we were going to spend, the federal government baseline was spending $86 trillion over the next 10 years. $86 trillion. All we're talking about in trying to modernize and change spending in this reconciliation budget, if you did the high end, so the House full all-in high end, which please God, let us get there, but the high end is $2 trillion. 86, we're trying to get 2, that's 2.3%, and that's creating the bedwetting. Did they really love their money, the spending? But remember, if you don't want tax hikes, I don't want tax hikes. Borrowing is a tax hike. It's just paid for in the future with interest. Stop thinking borrowing is free. My wife and I, we've adopted a couple kids. I have a 2.5-year-old. We're incredibly blessed. It looks like he's going to be fine. He's going to be normal. He's absolutely a joy. When he's 22 or so, just to maintain baseline spending in the United States, you have to double every single tax. That's the morality of this place. For the lobbyists, for the groups that are walking our halls saying, we want more spending. Don't do this horrible, devastating 2% cut in spending over the next 10 years. Thank you for screwing over my 2-year-old. Your absolute immorality. If you're going to walk into our office and demand more spending, tell us what you think, where we can modernize, where we can change the cost of government. We've come here and done presentations that the single biggest expense we have in government, turns out it's obesity. We did a whole model for the last couple of years, huge amounts. Remember, I chair the Joint Economic Committee, so I have like 5 PhD economists. We did the data, 9.1 trillion additional healthcare costs. Turns out the morality, if you'd help our brothers and sisters be healthier, but you got to do through the Farm Bill, you got to do through nutrition support. You're going to have to decide, are we going to have access to glutides and other things, but are we going to use technology, the wearables, the other things? I have one of those data rings on. What would happen if one of the most powerful things you can do for U.S. sovereign debt stabilization is a healthier society? And somehow that becomes a fringe conversation around here because people make money off of our brothers and sisters being sick. It's absolutely perverse. If you actually go, I think it was a year or so ago, I think it was Goldman Sachs did this huge report on GLP-1s, glutides. And somewhere in one of the footnotes was sent to me, and it had this line, a couple lines, saying if there was wide adoption and the United States actually became much healthier, much less morbid obesity, that there would be healthcare systems that would go bankrupt because they wouldn't have enough multi-chronic sick people to pay their bonds. Think about that. Everything's about the money here, not about the morality of having a society that's growing and prospering. Prosperity, I would argue, Mr. Speaker, is moral. How much of the crap we do here is not just satiating today's, Twitter-sphere screaming at us, or something that's completely made up, but actually building a plan saying, here's the prosperity we're going to build for the future. Sorry. I probably have already had too much coffee today. And this is just to make a point, and this is more to mock the Senate. And I was talking to one of the senators last night who also is concerned like I am. Maybe they hear our voices. So, Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And these are just the base numbers when they were first scored. This number actually came in half that. No interest is attached to it, but we stole this from someone else, but it was to make a point. Democrats complained about that. CARES Act, we complained about the excessive spending. The American Rescue Plan, we complained about Then you add in the bipartisan infrastructure act. It wasn't that bipartisan. I think they had just a handful of Republicans who wanted projects in their district. But you add it all up, all the things we have fretted over the last decade, and they don't even add up to the amount of borrowing that's in the Senate reconciliation budget. Because it's so much easier here just to spend and just borrow it. There's this attitude here, give it to me now. Oh, you guys will figure out something in the future. And for anyone out there who's, look, I've actually, we've worked with some of the Doge folks because I have the economists, but go on their official website right now. They think next year, 2026 fiscal year, we can save $160 billion. That's real money. But it's only, if we borrow $6 billion a day, what, 24, 23 days of borrowing. That's everything we've gotten. There's this inability for members of Congress, our staff, the public, to understand the scale of what we're up against. This basically just reiterates what I'm going to show a couple times here just because I need it to sink in. If we do the Senate reconciliation budget with our baseline, we double U.S. debt in 10 years. Going to say it a couple times so it sinks in. Debt held by the public, and they're using 2034. We prefer to use 2035 because that's more of an honest budget window. But you start to look at what the Senate resolution, this was baseline debt. They add another 32.7% to the debt. And if we do what the Senate put out in their budget reconciliation, we functionally double publicly held debt in the United States. What took us 240 years to do, bless us, we can do in 10. Because we're good at borrowing money, handing things out, telling people there's no consequences, making crap up, saying, it's health care for illegals. Okay, shouldn't do that. But it's only a couple days of borrowing over a year. You got to do lots and lots and lots of difficult things. And we've done entire presentations where we've shown you could revolutionize the cost of healthcare. We've actually looked at one data set, and we've been studying this now for months. If I came to you, Mr. Speaker, and said, just in Medicare, duplicative MRI scans, PET scans, X-rays, ultrasounds, could be as much as $25 billion a year. Duplicative scans. What if you got your knee scanned and you just attach it to this thing so it's portable with you? That's $250 billion over 10 years. Is that a cut? No. It's just a simple use of almost a free technology that's out there where you can load them on this and it's portable with you. We get lobbyists who don't like that idea because apparently they make money on the duplications. The inefficiencies, the frauds, those things are a business model now. When government controls functionally a quarter of all the spending in the United States, of all the GDP, and a big chunk of that is functionally waste and fraud and misallocations, bad design, give it whatever anachronism you want or title you want. Many of the lobbyists that are walking these hallways are here to stop us from modernizing the system and bringing it into this century and just using the technology. You walk around with a supercomputer in your pocket. This could crash the price of health care, make you healthier, give you access, all these things. And there's an army of people trying to stop us. Remember, telehealth here was an absolute war. There were millions being spent to stop it because it screwed up people's business models. And I'm going to do this a couple more times, and then we're going to do one more example. If we do what's being planned right now, you finish the next decade, well, 10 years from now, either 73.7 trillion of debt Our other chart actually gets it up to $74 trillion of debt. So when you hear a member on the Democrat side, Republican side, running for office, I care about the debt, but I'm more afraid of telling you the truth of what drives the debt. And the fact of the matter is the people walking the hallways here, often our own constituents, are screaming at us for more spending. Don't they have kids? Don't they even care about their own retirements? The absolute vacuousness of immorality. So I grabbed this from the Wall Street Journal. So I can't imagine anyone here has had protesters and people showing up in their office about Medicaid, which is supposed to be our safety net for indigents and the poor. I have some old experience with that. For a short time, I actually chaired the healthcare committee in the Arizona State Legislature when I was a child. For a while, I actually worked on the access budgets, which is the Arizona Medicaid system. We do something unique. We functionally buy managed care HMO policies for our poor people. It's actually shockingly efficient. Matter of fact, if you took the rest of the country and adopted the Arizona model, you could save hundreds of billions of dollars over those 10 years. But the Wall Street Journal did us a favor. They actually took the Arizona system, which actually has a shockingly high satisfaction rate, good outcomes. We can make it much better. But the punchline here is they're showing something called a provider tax. This was a scheme, and I have to openly admit, on part of it, which was the disproportionate share, this is geeky stuff, I was actually part of managing that many years ago. You know, I was county treasurer, I managed money, and we were part of the swap. But part of the scam out there is raise the cost of health care, create a tax, capture that tax, and because you raise the price, you also capture more money from the federal government in their percentage match. What the Wall Street Journal did was brilliant. They just produced this chart that says, do you know the Arizona government, and this is most state governments, actually use this provider tax washing machine. They make money. They actually take in more money. They're not meeting their obligation of, it was supposed to be a partnership. It was supposed to be a match. Is this a cut? It's just saying, look, there was a deal made in the late 60s that we were going to share some of the risk and some of the cost with our poor on providing health care. Then when Obama came in, they did this expansion and 10%, even though it was going to people who were still work eligible and those things. But then states, and this, we all knew this was going on, but it was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to be when coming out of a major recession, we were going to go back to normality. And instead, it's padding for state budgets. That cash isn't going into health care. It's financing other things and raising the U.S. debt because this is borrowed money.
Would the gentleman yield?
Absolutely.
I'd be happy to share time on the time that I have after the gentleman from Arizona. I want to thank the gentleman from Arizona for his steadfast devotion to highlighting for the American people the state of our fiscal health, which is not good, and the extent to which we're complicit in it. And I want to just point out that this thing that the gentleman from Arizona is talking about is so central to everything we're trying to deal with right here, right now in Congress. And if we don't fix that, then we will have failed. I want to be clear to my Republican colleagues. If we do not fix this scheme, this scam, the gentleman didn't misspeak. It is a scam. If we don't fix that, we will have failed. Let me just ask the gentleman a couple of questions.
Shoot.
Prior to the existence of Medicaid, right, there was no federal subsidy at all. This scheme couldn't have possibly existed in this way.
Yeah, most of this was designed late 60s.
Right.
My state I have this weird history. I was a child, I was early 20s. I was a temporary page at the state legislature, Arizona was the last state to enter Medicaid.
Right.
It was bankrupting our counties because up to that point in the early 80s, the counties were actually the provider of health care.
Right.
So we entered this, but we created a really crazy system saying we're going to do managed care to drive the price down. But yes,
and so Medicaid was created, and Medicaid was created to ostensibly provide an avenue for health care for the poor and vulnerable, right? It's a broad statement. Is that true?
The actual language was for indigents. It was mostly for women and children.
And it was supposed to then be a shared arrangement between the state and the federal government, correct?
And in the early days, it was like a 50-50, not 100% coming from the federal government.
Fast forward, and the current vulnerable population, okay, what we call the vulnerable population, the indigent, the poor, those who need it, single moms, people who are sick, the frail, that population, even under today's law, gets a federal, we'll call it match, it's really a formula, a match of 50 to 70%, depending on the jurisdiction.
Yeah,
is that correct?
It blends out closer to the 70. And now talk about the expansion population.
And so then now let's fast forward. What we're really talking about for everybody at home watching C-SPAN, all 14 of you, we have a situation where Obamacare expanded the Medicaid population, and it expanded it massively to a population that is much bigger and much more able-bodied, i.e. healthier. So now you would think, well, I don't know, is that good or bad? I have my problems with it facially, but even if you were going to do it, would you then say, as it does, that that population, the healthier, able-bodied population, should get 90% match from the federal government? Because that's what's happening. They get a 90% rate for that expanded population. Then layer on top of that, and this is, and I'll yield back, this is what you're now dealing with. The gentleman's chart that the Wall Street Journal did, where you have the provider taxes, you have this high rate that they are able to collect, and they're juicing it using the provider taxes. They get this 90% federal dollars, and then they're openly, California, for example, has stated they are gaming the system to get federal dollars to use that to subsidize illegal aliens and to people who are not the vulnerable population, and frankly, to put it in their general budget. That's what the gentleman's talking about. That's the current state of affairs. I yield back to the gentleman from Arizona.
No, and Mr. Roy, it goes further. So as we all get the paid for, have you had the occasion yet, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Roy, where a group comes into your office, somehow they were put on a plane, put in a hotel, those things here, they have no understanding of the mechanics, but somehow there were Medicaid providers in your state that had plenty of cash laying around to fly people out to come lobby.
Right.
And then, so we did this. We pulled open, here's another Wall Street Journal article from a week or two ago, talking about how many in the Medicaid systems here in the United States are enrolled in multiple states. So you actually have billions and billions and billions of dollars here. They're enrolled in multiple states. And even the discussion of, could we just match data? And you actually get objections to this because the fraud is part of the profit model. So I'm on Ways and Means. This is something Energy and Commerce is their primary jurisdictions. They're working through it. But if you just stack up the cheating, the misuse of the vacuousness, the absence of data to try to deal with the multiple enrollment of populations, if you actually start to stack these things up, how dare you call those cuts? How dare you? And why don't you care about the future of this government, the future of this society? We cannot handle the stacking of debt. Did I mention the $72,000 we borrow every second? And it only goes up. We have a model that says in the 10-year window, we're up somewhere in the mid-90s per second in borrowing. And we're terrified to tell the truth. Well, Mr. Roy, you may not want to be in the room for this one, because this is the stuff that gets you attacked at home, but it's math. It's the truth. It's the CBO numbers. Rising Social Security and Medicare shortfalls nearly drive the entire 2019 to 2033 deficit. This board is a couple years old, but the facts are the facts. We're terrified to tell the public the truth. The primary driver of debt is demographics. Go to CBO, and this board is actually today, we're waiting for the update, but we've done some back of the board math. The math is much uglier because interest rates are up substantially from when we calculated this 2 years ago. But you functionally have a country that, and so this one's from 2 years ago, the 30-year debt, we were going to borrow 124 trillion. If you remove Social Security and its finance costs, Medicare and its finance costs, the rest of the federal government actually grew slower than tax receipts. These numbers, and we'll probably have the update on this from CBO in the next couple of months with the higher interest rates, the higher running debt. We have models now that say over the 30 years, we're going to be at 200% of debt to GDP. That number is no longer 124 trillion, maybe 170 trillion of borrowing. I don't know how many of you plan to still be alive over the next 30 years. Do you really think the world financial markets are going to finance our debt? You have Ray Dalio, you know, the multi-billionaire hedge fund who's now retired, who's actually been coming here to Congress saying, warning, warning, the entire world's capital markets, because what China's borrowing, what Japan's borrowing, now Germany's going back into the debt markets, there's not enough capital in the world. When the United States is consuming 30 to 40% of all the money that goes to sovereigns, to governments, there's not, so what happens when there's a shortage of savings in the world to finance? Well, we can print money. Of course, that will set off inflation, so your life just becomes more miserable. And because so many of our benefits are all inflation indexed, you can't inflate yourself away from it because they go up. Or we can just pay the higher interest rates. Well, now you already saw the beginning chart that Moody's says in 9 budget years, 30% of our tax collections is interest. We have a model that shows a 1% increase rolled into our refinancing. In 10 years, 45% of all U.S. tax collections, all of it, is interest. Mr. Roy, Mr. Speaker, yet you have members here running around saying, I need more money for SALT. I want actually more money for this program. I want more money for this. Okay. Bring us ideas of how we modernize spending, how we can reduce costs by technology, by better systems, by a healthier society. But stop showing up at my door demanding more spending. There's no more money.
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
Please.
And I don't want to take away any of his thunder.
No, it's because you actually just stopped me from cursing, so you did good.
The question I have for the gentleman, when I graduated from law school at the University of Texas in 2003, the national debt was somewhere in the $6 trillion range, $6.5 trillion. Mm-hmm. When I came to Congress, when I was campaigning to come to Congress, it was just over 20 trillion. That was 2018. Today, we are pushing 37 trillion. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah, if you add in internally financed.
Correct.
The CBO says we will end this year at about 37.2. My number is 37.3. So yeah.
So now I bring that up because nobody at home understands that. You're doing a good job trying to put it in context,
12 zeros.
Trying to explain it about the amount of money we're borrowing per family or taxpayer or per second. But to put it in stark terms, what we're talking about with the debt and the deficits, what it really means is the inability to afford a house for the average American, right? Because the impact that flows from it is, as you alluded to, higher interest rates, a inability for the Fed and for Congress to continue to borrow and print money because of what you're describing worldwide, the ability to have people to buy our debt goes down. The cost of debt is going to go up. The interests are going up. Inflation is going up. And the average American family is going to take it on the chin. That's what we're talking about. And the reason I bring that up is because our colleagues, as you point out, run around here saying, I need more money for the program. I need more money for fill in the blank. I need more money for Medicaid. I need more money for SALT. Why? Because they feel like they've got a political interest in doing so. I'm sure the gentleman had, like I did yesterday, the Farm Bureau coming into your office and needing help. Guess what? I understand why they need help, because we, the federal government, have messed up their lives quite vociferously.
We distort.
And we distort, and so they want help. I get it. But then what do? Vote for food stamps? I'm a cancer survivor. You know that. And I have cancer groups coming in asking for money. I look at them and I say, well, can you go find some way to pay for it? And a lot of my colleagues don't want to do that. And I'll close with this. President Reagan had a great quote on the Johnny Carson show, late night show in the 70s, before he was president, in which he said, every program that a politician brings forward should have to come with a tax increase attached to it. Why is that? Was President Reagan pro-tax increases? I know the gentleman from Arizona knows that not to be true. President Reagan believed in tax cuts and more money in the pockets of Americans to create wealth, to create economic growth. But why he said that was because we promise things we can't deliver. We promise things that we deliver that are fake because we're doling out money, printing money to pay for programs, and then on the other side of the ledger, we never want to say we need a tax increase to pay for it, because we rightly understand tax increases constrain the economy. In other words, in short, we put ourselves in the box we've created. I yield to you.
I want to try to, we use the term socialize. How do I get it part of our folklore, our use of language? Borrowing money is a tax hike.
Correct.
You got to understand, okay, you're not going to raise taxes. I despise raising taxes.
Correct.
I want as much velocity in the economy. A classic free market economist.
Yep.
But borrowing money is a tax hike. And it's a tax hike with interest on it.
Yep.
It's just to be paid at a future date. But because the curve is now steepening, remember, I just showed you some charts that says we may double U.S. debt this decade. The curve is like this. You don't think we're not going to reach in and take some of your retirement? This is no longer about your grandkids. It's no longer about your kids. It's you. But I believe the political class has lied their backsides off for so long, or we play this game. You will see some people on social media, you could save $1 million doing this. Okay, you borrow $250 million an hour.
Yeah.
$250 million every hour is the borrow. Watch out for the scam artists who play the game. They give you something that's outrageous. Okay, get rid of it. But sometimes the things we will debate for hours here are minutes or sometimes seconds of borrowing.
Yep.
But the big stuff, because there's so many lobbyists and constituencies that live off that money, you're not allowed to talk about that. And look, Mr. Roy, look, I'm blessed. I have Phoenix and Scottsdale. I have one of the best educated districts in America. I have them fairly prosperous. They tolerate me. They sometimes aren't happy with what I say.
Yeah.
But at least they know my math is good.
Would the gentleman yield on that? One of the things that I've been saying in this building for the last several months is this debate about what we call, I think somewhat wrongly and incorrectly, mandatory spending, because it's not mandatory. We've just chosen to put it on autopilot. It's automatic spending. It's not really mandatory.
That's a better name.
And so I've been saying in this building repeatedly that the math has to math. The math has to add up. And would the gentleman agree, the fundamental and core problem in this town, when we're talking about the state of affairs. So, for example, we in this process have taken Medicare off the table politically, but the president has asked us to take Medicare off the table. We have taken Social Security off the table because by law, we are not allowed to touch Social Security in the reconciliation process. And then interest is off the table because you got to pay it. You can't just magically not pay the interest. So that adds up to what? About 47% of the total frigging budget, half the budget.
Yeah, and just understand in reconciliation, which is the one time we're allowed to talk about mandatory spending, the majority of mandatory spending we're not allowed to touch.
Correct.
Because if you use Social Security and interest, that's probably 54, 55% of all mandatory. Sorry, it's a weird way I remember numbers. But I can give you, so let's actually, let's risk our political careers. How many of you have read the Wall Street Journal articles from the last year? I think they've done 5 or 6 major exposés on something we call Medicare Part C. It's the Medicare Advantage. It was the sort of managed care version within Medicare option that was developed by Republicans in 2005. One of their articles basically says they identified about $63 billion of waste, fraud, misalignment a year.
Right.
A year.
Right.
A year. Yeah. The MedPAC report, because I'm the only idiot who came here to the floor with the MedPAC, but it's partially my responsibility being Ways and Means. The MedPAC report, all highlighted, and we showed the MedPAC report says Medicare Advantage, the Part C, is coming in at 120% of fee-for-service. Just that delta from where it was supposed to be at 95%, I know there's a lot of numbers, when we designed Medicare Advantage, long before you and I got here, it was supposed to come at 95% of fee-for-service. That 25% delta is $100 billion a year, and if you do the curve, because of the growth of the program it's expected, that's $1.5 trillion over 10 years, just putting it back to what it was supposed to be. It's equal to everything we're talking about trying to reform in our reconciliation packages. How many conversations have we been willing to have saying, hey, you do realize we could modernize Medicare Advantage so the incentive for the providers is to have populations be healthier than running around and scoring them as sicker. Just align the incentives. I just found you $1 trillion. Why can't we have conversations like this where we're trying to preserve the programs and the future at the same time?
The gentleman was asking a rhetorical question.
Yeah,
and
you don't have to answer that because the moment you answer, there will be an army of paid lobbyists, people running ads in your district, probably now beating the crap out of me on social media, because when it's that sort of money, you know they're going to, and you also saw the articles 3 weeks ago, Wall Street Journal, there's criminal investigations now going on. Justice Department now is diving into these folks. So there's more going on here. I will argue, Mr. Roy, and some of our friends who are fiscal conservatives but also want to modernize the delivery of services, help me. We have spent almost a year diving into the data. What would happen if fixing these misalignments, the waste and fraud, actually it doesn't get us where we need to be, but it starts moving us the right direction? Mr. Roy, I think I'm actually against my time, so I'm going to do that moment. I'm going to first apologize to the folks who had to try to take our words down for talking too fast, for the poor speaker that had to sit here and listen to this, and to my staff that's now going to have to write lots of apology letters for all the people I just hurt their feelings. But with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.